Vacation plans, long commute, weekend at the cabin. Wherever you end up this summer, the Connector Idaho Daily News helps keep you connected to Idaho, even while you're away. Get the top local stories every weekday morning in just a few minutes. That's the Connector Idaho Daily News. Listen on your podcast app.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. And our panelists today, Kevin Fixler, investigative reporter with the Idaho Statesman, Laura Guido with Idaho Capital Sun, our very own George Prentice with Boise State Public Radio, and Drew Dotson, reporter and editor for the Valley Lookout. And today we are beginning with a story that's been making national headlines. Just more than a year after Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty to killing 4 University of Idaho students, he's claiming he's innocent, saying his own defense team coerced him into a false confession, and he's asking a judge to let him withdraw his guilty plea. This is a rare legal move that could, if successful, put the case back on track for a trial and potentially reopen the possibility of the death penalty. And Kevin, you have covered this story from the get-go. So as I said, Bryan Kohberger, he waived his right to appeal when he accepted that plea agreement last July. So how is he still able to challenge his conviction?
We've long known that this was a possibility, and even Judge Stephen Hippler, who presided over the case, had indicated at the sentencing hearing that just because a now prisoner waives his right to appeal, you really can't fully waive such a thing. And that's based on an Idaho case that actually went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and was decided that there are appeals still open, including arguments for ineffective assistance of counsel, which is essentially where Bryan Kohberger is going with this. So what he has filed is a petition for post-conviction relief. It's a civil case. It's not technically an appeal, legally speaking, but for all intents and purposes, this is an effort toward an appeal, and he is trying to withdraw his guilty plea.
So you mentioned Judge Stephen Hippler. He is the judge who presided over the case. In fact, calling him, and I'm quoting, the worst of the worst. Now, Judge Hippler will be the judge that decides whether these claims have enough merit to move forward. So, Kevin, walk us through the role that Judge Hippler plays at this stage.
Sure. Judge Hippler is the administrative district judge for Ada County, where the case was ultimately moved down here in Boise from Latah County, the Moscow area. And he, as the original judge, is often assigned that's the circumstance in a post-conviction relief petition, which is what this is. So it's not uncommon in these types of cases where the original judge will oversee. So far, Kohberger has filed the petition itself, handwritten pro se, meaning he's representing himself at the time, just last week in making his filings. And he has also made a request for a public defender, a new public defender. So Judge Hippler will weigh in on each of those things and also whether or not there are any merits to Kohberger's claims.
And Kevin, in your reporting, you spoke with experienced Idaho defense attorneys who, were pretty skeptical of Kohberger's claims. What were their biggest reasons for believing this petition faces really long odds?
Yeah, with my colleague Alex Brizzi at the Statesman, we interviewed several legal experts, attorneys in the area and across the state. And Kohberger's arguments are essentially that he was lied to. He was coerced by his attorneys into pleading guilty, that they suggested that lying, including under oath, would not be a problem. But yes, you've noted the skepticism here. Even in efforts for post-conviction relief, it's a tall order. It's a high bar. And Kohberger, under oath in court, stood up, swore the oath, and repeatedly answered in the affirmative that, yes, he had proper counsel from his attorneys. He was satisfied with their efforts. They pushed it to the fullest extent, essentially, and he knowingly and voluntarily agreed that he was guilty. Stephen Hippler, the judge, during that the plea hearing, had mentioned, I want you to only plead guilty if you are guilty. And Kohberger confirmed that was the case. So the fact he has already stated on the record under oath repeatedly and been asked if there was anything that had induced this sort of thing and denied that he was not making a decision on his own would make it difficult probably for Judge Hippler to grant this and thus it is a narrow possibility that this moves
Mhm.
forward.
Oh, but let's say it does somehow succeed, right? And it does
Hmm.
move forward and he's able to withdraw his guilty plea.
Hmm.
Um, what happens next? I mean, does that original plea agreement disappear, including protection from the death penalty?
I think first thing we have to see is the state's response. They are almost certainly going to oppose and object to this, so we can expect those filings. Koberger, as I said, has asked for a new public defender. Judge Hippler has granted that through the state public defender's office. A specific attorney has not been named just yet, so we're sort of waiting for that. But were it to move forward, yes, and Koberger acknowledged this. This story was broken by the New York Times, including an interview
Hmm.
that Koberger did directly with them. And he stated that he was fine with putting the death penalty back on the table in an effort to get a new trial because he is claiming not only was he um, convinced by his attorneys to plead guilty, but that he is innocent.
So you've spoken with members of the victims' families, I believe, including Steve Gonsalves, Kaylee's dad. Um, how have they reacted to Koberger's decision to recant his confession?
Generally speaking, I think you could expect how members of these four families
Yeah.
would feel about this. This is, a year after he was sentenced and been in prison, Koberger, and it's not being taken particularly well. It's very emotional, and the things that they thought had reached a conclusion and finality, they could finally sort of seek some form of closure. It's now back right in their face. And the families are having a difficult time with this. Most chose not to comment, but I did speak directly with Steve Gonsalves the day this news broke, and we saw the post-conviction petition. And their family is unique in this, and that they always wanted a trial and they always wanted the death penalty. And so ultimately, what the prosecution granted through a plea deal with Koberger upended both of those things. So while they're not
Mhm.
welcoming of this news, they sort of expected it, that it might come one day because Koberger would want the limelight all over again, is their perspective. And they're not afraid of it. They're not running from the idea that there could be a trial. They are very open to that in an effort to get new information out about the case, and that it was Koberger, that he admitted to this and was the person who killed these four people, including their daughter. And as a result, they are very interested in restoring the death penalty option.
So before I let you go, Kevin, what happens next? I mean, will we see Koberger back in court soon?
That's ultimately Judge Hippler's decision. As I said, just on Wednesday, he granted the right for Koberger to have a public defender. We're waiting for that attorney to be assigned. I assume that
Hmm.
attorney will probably pursue the scope of what Koberger has filed on his own in those handwritten petitions for, uh, the claims of essentially ineffective assistance. And so they will pursue that legal strategy. And we will see if Judge Hippler grants a hearing. As I said, we can expect that the state prosecution, whether that's the Attorney General's office or the Latah County prosecutors, will oppose this. There will be a filing to, respond, and then it will be up to Judge Hippler whether or not to hold Koberger in his court or perhaps virtually from the jail or the prison, I should say. And
Hmm.
we will have to see. Well, we don't know just yet, but everybody is waiting on pins and needles nationally.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking time to talk with us, Kevin. Thanks so much for that. The other big news this week, wildfires and smoke and our air quality. So, George, we are talking at noon on Friday. So, as of right now, can you give us a sense of the fires and where are we with these smoke alerts?
Indeed. So you may have read headlines overnight or social media posts that said, hey, things are better. There are shades of blue. We're moving in the right direction. To which we say, not so fast. As I speak, midday on Friday, I'm downtown and I am looking in the direction of the foothills. And I say direction because you can't see the foothills. The smoke is thick. You can certainly see it and taste it. As of midday, Boise is at 138 AQI, air quality index. That is the high end of orange, keeping in mind that at 150, it would be unhealthy for everyone. So here we go. The big grass fire, which has tormented much of our region with smoke at the Idaho-Oregon border. The big grass fire near Jordan Valley has now topped 300,000 acres, 21% contained. Evacuations in Owyhee County are underway, particularly near Pleasant Valley and the Triangle Reservoir. We should also note in north central Idaho, because of wildfire threat, Vista Power is warning customers there that conditions may prompt the electricity utility to preemptively shut off power in some areas on Saturday to mitigate fire risk. That happened last weekend in Kamei. This weekend, it could affect many more communities in north central Idaho. And breaking news this morning, approximately 250 active duty U.S. Army soldiers. So this is in addition to National Guard. 250 active duty U.S. Army soldiers are mobilizing to assist the wildfire efforts for the National Interagency Fire Center here in Boise. They will serve as hand crews across the Pacific Northwest. We are at a point where a number of firefighting crews are struggling with staffing. We heard this morning from Michael Davis, a public information officer staffing the Tartar Fire in Washington County, says it's not just firefighting equipment that's hard to get. Let's take a listen.
We are stretched very thin. I know on the Tartar Fire, we've had a lot of difficulty trying to fill requests for everything from caterers, shower units, bulldozers, whatever it may be.
Wow.
So, George, can you also talk to us really about the true impacts of the smoke? Because you spoke to a local emergency room doctor about this, and I think this is important for people to truly understand.
Indeed, we talk about data so much, AQIs and temperature readings. It's much different when you put a face to this. We spoke to Dr. Ethan Sims, an ER physician and executive director of Idaho Clinicians for Climate and Health. Again, Dr. Ethan Sims, let's take a listen.
And I want to tell a story about a patient I had yesterday that was a 7-week-old who has been coughing and struggling to breathe for about 2 weeks, had been seen by their pediatrician several times, had kind of every test under the sun with no answer about an infection, sent to the hospital because there were concerns that maybe this was a heart problem. We did a bunch of cardiac testing that all looked normal. And so, what does that leave us with as the cause of this kid's breathing difficulty that required him to be hospitalized? I think the answer is in the air. And I think the smoke was probably the reason that we're hospitalizing a 7-week-old because he can't breathe.
Wow. Oh, George. Okay. So what does the long-range forecast look like? I mean, any relief in sight?
Yes and no. So we're looking at a dry cold front up in southern Canada, right near our border. That will arrive Saturday afternoon. That front approaches, bringing in some southwest to west winds, increasing Saturday morning. Those winds turn gusty Saturday afternoon and evening. The gusts could go to 25 to 35 miles an hour. Here's the bad news. As the air quality alert goes away and the temperatures go down, we come into a fire weather watch because of the high winds and the dry conditions. There is a chance of what they call critical fire weather. So, folks, if it's not the smoke, it is lightning. And let's just say a word or two and good thoughts to all of our firefighting personnel across the region.
Yeah, absolutely. One of Idaho's U.S. Senate races just took a turn. Laura, can you talk to us? Why did Democrat David Roth ultimately decide to end his campaign right now, especially after he said that he had no plans to step aside?
Yeah, on Tuesday, he sent out a statement saying that he basically wanted to drop out and focus on getting other Democrats elected. He said that's where he felt like he could make the greatest difference. But you're right, I spoke to him earlier this month, just in my normal coverage of this race. And at that time, he did not express any desire to drop out. And I'm going to be honest, I haven't been able to contact him to follow up to see why he changed his mind. So that's all we really know now is what was in his statement on Tuesday.
Well, there had been growing pressure from some Democrats for Roth to actually drop out and unite behind independent candidate Todd Achilles. Laura, I'm curious with your reporting, does Roth's exit change the dynamics of this Senate race, even if Roth doesn't endorse independent Todd Achilles?
I think the Achilles campaign has definitely been trying to make the case that it does change. He's been arguing that his campaign is attracting the interest of people who are upset with both parties. There's been some calls from some prominent Democrats, some former Congressman Larry LaRocca was one of them, asking him to step down and kind of rally behind Achilles. But his statement on Tuesday didn't mention anything about Achilles. And when I asked him about it, he said he felt like they were too far away on the issues. Roth said he wanted more progressive, more kind of left-leaning ideas, and he felt like Achilles' campaign was more moderate than he really wanted to support. But the Achilles campaign has said head-to-head he thinks he has a better chance. So I guess we'll see.
Yes, we will definitely wait and see. Leaders up in McCall are rethinking one of the town's biggest traditions. This is the 4th of July holiday celebrations. And George and Drew, I know both of you have been covering this. So George, let me begin with you because your reporting highlighted the police chief's unique request ahead of next year's holiday. So we're talking a year from now. What's he asking for and why does he think that these changes are necessary?
Gemma, communities mitigate risks usually related to wildfire or flooding or extreme heat. McCall officials are talking about mitigating what they say is a different kind of risk. Too many tourists. The chief of police, Dallas Palmer, went before the McCall City Council and said, hey, we're spending all of this money for overtime to police the 4th of July and the days that surround it. And this past year, they shelled out tens of thousands of dollars to team up with a private security firm to bring in 15 more people to shore up law enforcement defenses. So it's budget time, and the chief is basically saying, okay, where's this money going to come from next year? And he went as far as saying, you know what, we ought to consider dipping into our local option tax. Let's take a listen to the chief.
We spend almost $30,000 on a security team. We spend a lot on officer overtime. I think it makes great sense to utilize these lot funds. It is a difficult event to reach out to sponsors and say, hey, we want to promote you, while at the same time we're trying to, control and contain some of this chaos that's taking place, right?
So Drew, let me bring you into the conversation because city leaders in McCall are actually now debating whether to just end the annual fireworks show altogether. I mean, what's driving that conversation and truly how serious is that proposal?
Well, it's exactly what George was alluding to, where you've got this massive influx of people throughout the course of the July 4th holiday, and particularly when it falls on a weekend, like it has the last couple of years. And just the city's ability to kind of manage that, obviously with the added security firm this year, that was a new thing that hadn't been done before. And it was to kind of help with those overtime hours that McCall police were accruing throughout the course of the weekend, trying to keep up and frankly, not being able to keep up because there's only so many bodies, right? And so, that's certainly part of what's driving the conversation, in addition to kind of just, I've mentioned on the show before, but the natural give take of tourism versus locals and the kind of the competing interests at play there. There's some desire on the council's part to throw locals a bone, if you will, and not promote these kinds of things, not drive even more people here by creating these kinds of draws. And as far as how serious it is, look, I think the fact that the council they're talking about it, they want to seek public opinion on it. They haven't necessarily shown their hand too far one way or the other yet, but I think the reason they're seeking public opinion is that they are open-minded about a potential change here.
Mm-hmm. So, George, let's talk about what the police chief is saying, because he said the city is seeing a lot more underage drinking, those larger crowds, as Drew mentioned, especially when the holiday falls on a weekend. So what kinds of citations and arrests are they making? And it, it doesn't necessarily seem to be working because the crowds just seem to be getting bigger.
Yeah, I lived in McCall for a number of years, and I've been reporting on this for even more years. And honestly, I don't think it has changed a whole heck of a lot. This year, McCall police made, let's see, 116 traffic stops between July 1st and the 5th. They handed out 13 citations for underage drinking. They made 8 arrests for assault. Over the years, they've tried to rebrand the 4th of July. They've tried to add different wording for citations. And now, as Drew is reporting, they think that they can keep people away by saying, well, we just won't put on a show over the lake. Good luck with that. I think a lot of people in the Treasure Valley see McCall as kind of like their backyard, especially when it comes to holidays. Like it or not, the irony, of course, is McCall, because it's a resort community, gets to actually assess a local option tax. Now they want to use that tax to mitigate tourists and the impact on their city.
So, Drew, before any final decision is made, you did say that they do want the public to weigh in. So, do we have a timeline on what this could potentially look like? And could we see the fireworks not there next year?
Yeah, so there's a survey that was put out. It's online either yesterday or today. I'll have a short story on Valley Lookout today with a link out to that survey for anybody who wants to weigh in. And as far as the timeline goes, this is kind of crazy, but the contractor for these fireworks displays, they book up nearly a year in advance. And so really we're talking about the next month or two. A decision needs to be made.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So fast. All right. Well, I'm sure not just us, but a lot of folks are going to be paying attention to whether those fireworks come back to McCall next season. Laura, an Idaho National Guard deployment to Washington, D.C. is now at the center of a multi-million-dollar legal claim because a woman alleges that a guardsman used excessive force when he was detaining her outside of her home. So get us up to speed here. I mean, what exactly does this lawsuit allege happened during this encounter? I believe the woman's name is Anna King, and this Idaho National Guard. What evidence has been made public so far?
Yeah, in her claim, she basically describes, or her attorneys describe, that she was sitting outside her home in May. 3 guardsmen approach her. She also, there was a video of the incident, and she can be heard kind of yelling at them, telling them not to touch her. They block her from going back inside, and then eventually kind of pin her to the ground and cuff her with their hands behind her back while she's on the ground. She's saying in the claim that the damage to her wrist required surgery, and she still is experiencing some numbness from it, as well as some other injuries right after. And there's a video included, and that's all we really have to go on so far about what happened in May.
So, Laura, the claim does raise questions about the National Guard's authority in D.C. So, do we know what guards are legally allowed to do when it comes to detaining people, and how does that potentially differ from making an arrest?
Yeah, so according to some local reporting and the Army's news website, the National Guard that are deployed in DC are not supposed to make arrests, but they can detain people. And basically, detaining someone is more temporary. It allows officers to kind of figure out what to do next. It requires a lower legal standard in terms of being reasonably suspicious that a crime had occurred or was about to occur. Arresting someone is more of that more long-term custody. It's when that you formally get booked into jail. It requires kind of a higher legal standard to do. And National Guard members who are in DC are not authorized to make arrests.
Laura, has the Idaho National Guard or state officials responded to these allegations?
Yeah, I reached out to the governor's office and the Idaho National Guard, and I didn't hear back specifically about this claim. They did tell me that the Idaho National Guardsmen have been deployed in DC since February. And it's kind of part of this. President Trump had an executive order about that's supposed to improve crime rates in DC. But that's all I've really heard, and that's all we really know at this point.
Do we know what happens next in this case?
Yeah, sure. So she filed it under the Federal Tort Claims Act. So it's kind of like a precursor to a lawsuit. Basically, the government has 6 months to act. If they reject the claim or they refuse to pay all the damages that she's seeking, then she would be able to file a full civil lawsuit, and that could, go on to a full trial.
Thanks for that update, Laura. I do appreciate it. So Tamarack Resort is proposing a new financing tool. This would apparently help pay for millions of dollars in infrastructure because it is preparing for a really big expansion. In fact, an expansion that would nearly double the size of the resort. And Drew, I know you've been reporting on this. So what exactly is a community infrastructure district? And then why does Tamarack officials there believe it's the best way to pay for this next phase of development?
Well, it would be a new taxing district, an independent entity that would basically take in the undeveloped portions of the resort's private land. And to keep it very simple, as far as why does Tamarack believe this is the best way to put in? I mean, we're talking about roughly $160 million in terms of, water lines, sewer lines, roads, bridges, that kind of thing. It kind of expedites the process, right? Because what it allows them to do is that district can take out debt to pay for all these infrastructure upgrades, and then that debt is later repaid by the homeowners who buy into these developments that Tamarack's planning.
Okay, so you said like water line, sewer, things like that, but this is almost double a double expansion of the resort. So what else, Drew, would if this happens would be built? I mean, is it more housing, like bigger?
It's
Uh,
it's kind of the
ski hill? I
gamut.
mean, what are we looking at?
Yeah, it's you're looking at nearly 1,000 new homes, condos, hotel rooms. Um, there's like I forget it's like a pitch and putt golf course.
Oh,
There would be this is a whole scale expansion of the resort, and one thing to understand here is this is not, even though this is coming to the table now, this sort of development was already entitled 20 years ago under the initial planned unit development that was approved by Valley County for Tamarack. They've got approval to build more than 2,000 units. They've currently built somewhere in the neighborhood of 700. And
wow.
so I think the exact number with what they're calling heritage is now 911 units on about 1,000 acres. That's kind of south of the resort's existing base area. So that's where this is coming from. This is kind of a continuation of the development that was envisioned all along, dating back 20, 25 years ago.
Okay, so one part of this proposal that's getting some attention, and can you talk about this, is that Tamarack would be the only property owner initially, as you said, then people would buy in. But because they would be the only property owner initially, if I'm understanding this correctly, that means that they would be the only vote when it comes to taking on all of this debt. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. So how does that process work, Drew?
Yeah, you've got it exactly right. So right now, where we're at with this is they've gone before the Board of Valley County Commissioners, basically seeking approval to create this taxing district. And at the point that if they gain that approval, they would then be able to hold a special election for voters within the district boundaries. And as you said, since Tamarack owns the land within district boundaries, they would be the only entity casting a vote as to whether or not to take on this debt. And so where the rubber meets the road on that is, they get to authorize it up front, and then as they build these lots, as they sell them, as they sell lots to other landowners, then those landowners would have assessments added to their property tax bills to repay the debt.
But yet they wouldn't have any say if their property tax bills go up, at least how it is right now.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
It would be at the
Okay.
fine print.
All right. So I'm curious, Drew. Have you talked to anyone who lives in this proposed district yet? And what have they said about this?
Well, so the county commissioners have they've asked questions at this point. They haven't
Mhm.
really leaned too far one way or the other as to what they're thinking. I mean, there seems to have been general support. Kind of the argument for beyond, the Tamarack's motivation of, well, we can get the infrastructure in faster, we can make this happen faster. The idea is that you ensure that growth pays for growth, essentially, that the people who buy into this development will be the ones who actually pay for the infrastructure when it's all said and done. Now, with that being said, there hasn't been a public hearing for this yet. However, there has been some grumblings about just the county commissioners would serve as the board for this taxing district and would basically be taking on an administrative burden. And the caution is that, this could be more involved than you realize. That's kind of what we've heard so far.
Okay, so as you said, it sounds like the county commissioners haven't, said whether they're going to support this or not at this point. But what other questions or concerns then are they potentially raising? So let's start there. And I know they have, before they would give their approval, but I'm assuming, Drew, they would have to take public comment on this before they decide, or would they not?
Well, right. There will be a public hearing. It hasn't been
Okay.
scheduled at this point. I anticipate in the next month, maybe two. I know Tamarack is eager to get this rolling. Um, and I don't have much beyond that. I think we're going to see and hear a lot more when that public hearing is finally held.
Mm-hmm. You know what's fascinating to me always about Tamarack is that there was a time, as you mentioned, Tamarack has now been here for 20 some years, which is kind of mind blowing. There was a time when when it became a ghost town, right? So
Yes.
so can you talk about that? Because there are a lot of folks who may not know that if they haven't lived here for that long to see this expansion, because it's almost like when you talk about taking on hundreds of millions of dollars of debt, realizing that there was a time where, Tamarack almost completely shut down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, for me, it's still a little weird to drive up there into the base area and not see Tyvek.
Yeah.
For a
Yeah.
lot of years, the village, you just saw Tyvek flapping in the wind, and all the building material. It was like the construction crews were there one day and just left and never came back, and
Mm-hmm.
all the materials were still sitting there. Um, and so it was 2019 that an equity firm out of Florida actually purchased the resort and started dumping money back into it. They finished the village. They brought the golf course back. They reinstalled the Wildwood chairlift, which was famously repossessed by helicopter some years ago. I forget if it was 2015 or 2016, exactly when it was. But it's night and day. I mean, even from 5, 6 years ago to what you see now at the resort, it's like you said, it's mind blowing. And the idea of really more than doubling it with this, heritage expansion. I mean, it was unthinkable as recently
Mm-hmm.
as 2019, 2020. So it's really something.
It really is. So, okay. So again, if folks are just joining us, then there will be public comment. We just don't know yet when that will be, or when there will be a decision on moving forward with this or not.
That's correct. Yeah, Tamarack's presented to the county commissioners a couple times, kind of about their intentions with all this, but they actually have to formally file a petition to create this community infrastructure district, and then at that point, a window opens. I believe it's between 30 and 90 days, that the county commissioners have to hold that public hearing. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
So real quick, Drew, before we take a break, if this is approved, and since we're talking about doubling the size of Tamarack, have they put a timeline on how long this construction would take?
It would be phased. I think from their standpoint, kind of the sooner the better. But obviously, the market often dictates these kinds of things. How quickly are they able to sell lots? But I know, as planned, the rough plans they've submitted to the county, which, by the way, they would still need the land use itself is entitled, but they would still need approval for the final designs, the plats and how they're laying everything out and all that. That would all still go before planning and zoning. They're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 phases. So it's, I have no doubt it would be spread out over a decade at least.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, appreciate the reporting on that. Idaho is one step closer to selecting the communities that could receive a new round of federal Opportunity Zone tax incentives. Now, these are apparently aimed at encouraging housing and economic development across the state. So, Laura, let's start with this question. What is an Opportunity Zone?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a federal designation. It's something that came about in 2017 during the first Trump administration. Basically, local governments and states can ask to have they're called census tracts, certain areas designated to where if basically areas they want to grow, they're supposed to be economically distressed. But certain developments would get tax incentives, and it's just a way to try and increase housing and increase, business development, things like that.
Okay, so they would, as you said, they would get these federal tax incentives in these opportunity zones. So do we know then how that would, as you just mentioned, impact things like housing and economic development here in Idaho?
It's hard to say because kind of the first round of this that happened didn't include kind of comprehensive reporting requirements. So it's hard to say how well it worked. But anecdotally, I have heard that there was a housing development in Sandpoint that happened because using the tax incentives. There was a food hall in Twin Falls, and there are some other projects around the state that helped under the first round. So people are hopeful that the second round will spur even more growth.
So can you talk about the latest recommendations? Because I believe, did Boise land the top 3 recommendations on the state's list?
Yeah, so the state hasn't finalized its recommendations yet, but the Economic Advisory Council basically looked over all the applications from different cities and localities around the state. They recommended it to the governor's office. The governor has the final say, which will happen in September. But the Economic Advisory Council, they pretty much weighted their list based on a ranking of how likely these areas were to benefit from the program, which was created using a tool from the Urban Institute. And Boise did land in kind of the top 3 spots with areas around the university, downtown, and around the mall.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. So in your reporting, you said like West Main Street and downtown, and then the West Boise corridor, which includes the Boise Town Square Mall area, and then Boise State University and West University Drive. So Laura, as you said, they haven't made any decisions at this point. Do we know when there might be a decision made on these opportunity zones, and then who would get these federal tax incentives to move forward with building and economic growth?
Yeah, the governor, I believe, has until the end of September to make his recommendations, September 28th, to the U.S. Department of Treasury. Beyond that, I'm not sure what their timeline is, but it probably starting like next year or so, these will start going into place.
And we should note really quick, Laura, that even though Boise got those top 3 recommendations, there are quite a few other areas on this list. Can you maybe just talk about really quickly, just about maybe 1 or 2 of them?
Yeah, I mean, there were areas in Burley, kind of around their Main Street area. The city of Emmett had a good chunk of their city was in the recommendations. Caldwell, areas around Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls, Nampa and Pocatello were also on that list, as well as some other cities.
All right, appreciate that. So, George, we've got about 4 minutes left on the show today, and we cannot leave today without talking about a really incredible Boise tradition that is happening this weekend. For folks who aren't familiar, George, tell us what the San Ignacio Festival is.
San Ignacio is a festival honoring Saint Ignatius, who is considered the patron saint of the Basques. He was from Loyola in Spain. He was actually the founder of the Jesuit Order of Catholics. He lived in the Basque province. He died on July 31st, and that is why there is a Feast of St. Ignatius celebrations all across Europe, from Vatican City, all across Spain. And of course, Basque immigrants brought this feast to our area as they came here, and it became a little bit more formal as Boise's Basque community continued to grow. And of course, we've got the Basque Block. So it is certainly the highlight of their calendar, but it's also pretty much the highlight of the height of summer for the city of Boise. And yes, it's a go for this weekend. Things are happening. They've closed off the block as we speak.
Okay, so George, what can folks expect to see and do this weekend? I mean, because I think one of the really neat things, and a lot of people may not know this, is the handball and the handball court that's on the Basque Block.
Absolutely. They play what is called pelota, which are a series of ball sports. There are both paddle ball and handball sports. And that will be taking place also on the Basque Block at the Fronta. And by the way, they bring in some of the top professional handball and paddleball athletes, men and women in the world from the Basque Country, where competitions will take place throughout this weekend, and finals will be on Saturday. It is one of the fastest sports you'll ever see. It's fascinating to watch. So sports is a really big part of this, but so is dance. There will be dance exhibitions, and there'll be a street dance as well. But there's the little ones in their costumes, and all the way up to adults, and they practice for this weekend all year long. And then, of course, the food and the drink.
Okay, George, I have less than 2 minutes though. What about air quality? I mean, I know a lot of it's inside, but how is that going to impact any of the festival?
Well, keep in mind that there is a Basque Center, which is very air conditioned.
Yes,
there's a family carnival actually inside the Basque Center. But out on the block, indeed, there will be celebrations, some eating and drinking, and lots of ice and lots of beverages. But it's a go. And by the way, one other real quick note, you'll see Basque flags along with American flags. Remember the big flag flap at the Idaho legislature and the debate over the pride flag, and how the legislature had to give a special okay to that law for Boise to fly the Basque flag. Politics even makes its way to the San Ignatius Festival.
Yes, it does. All right. Well, George, it is always such a treat when the festival is here. I want to thank all of our reporters for making time with us today. Kevin Fixler with the Idaho Statesman, Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun, our very own George Prentice, and Drew Dotson with the Valley Lookout. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Idaho Matters. And for quick news of the day, start your mornings with our podcast. It's called The Connector, Idaho Daily News. If this podcast has become a part of your routine, can you tap 5 stars and leave us a review? It helps us stand out.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.